Hello, everybody. My name is John Smedley. I am the studio head for Amazon Game Studios in San Diego. Now, before I want to get started here, I'd like to thank both Mark Chandler from TIGS and Yves Crevochet from Take This for giving me the opportunity to speak about a topic that I'm really deeply passionate about. And that is being both a gamer and a game maker with depression. Now, this is a subject that it's very deeply personal to me. I made the choice a long time ago to be completely open about it in all aspects of my life, both personal and professional. And I hope that by sharing my story, maybe some of you that have depression or work with somebody that has it can understand it a little more and lend a hand to someone who might need it sometimes. Now, to tell you a little bit about me, I'm 52 years old, I'm married, I've got 4 kids, and I'm a lifelong gamer. And I've been making games professionally for 32 years. And I've had depression for my entire career. Now today I'm going to tell you my story about depression and how it impacted my life, my gaming, my job. But first, let's make sure we talk about what depression really is. Depression is a mental health disorder that negatively impacts the way we think, the way we feel, the way we act. And this is different from just ordinary sadness and disappointment that we sometimes feel as a part of everyday life. This is something that persists for weeks, months, years, and in some cases, for your whole life. Depression can steal the joy out of everyday life. It can make the world seem gray and colorless. And in extreme cases, it can take lives. In my career, I've seen that dark side of depression take friends and colleagues, and I've seen the struggles of teammates wrestling with this in the shadows, afraid to discuss it because they feel like it's going to mark them in some way. Let's just put it into that right now. This shouldn't be something that we're uncomfortable to talk about. Statistics show that roughly 1 in 6 people in the United States are on some kind of psychiatric medication, with the majority being antidepressants. Now, that's a hell of a lot of people. Think about the teams you're on, big, small, or the companies you've been at, also big and small. It's all around us. It affects people at every single level in the game industry and really in all industries. If it affects you like it does me, you're in good company. You're not alone. Now, depression first hit me when I was young. I was a senior in high school. I had an awesome high school life. It was a mixture of playing Dungeons and Dragons with my friends, hanging out in the computer lab, learning how to program, and getting very average grades. I spent a lot more time playing games and programming than I did on classwork. But even then, I tended to like to be alone or in small groups of friends. Never been really super comfortable in big groups. My D&D buddies were a small group, and we used to get together every single weekend and every spare minute we could. And then we would get together and play and enjoy the time with each other, and then we'd go back to school, and I wouldn't see them again until the next weekend. But that same time, I also found computer games. I had a small group of friends that I hung out with in the high school computer room, playing pirated copies of anything we can get our hands on for the Apple II Plus. All the computers we had at school, pretty much at lunchtime, every single one of those things ended up being a game machine. Now I was hooked. As soon as I could put my hands on an Apple II Plus, and I learned as much as I could about it. As fast as I could get my hands on anything I could read, I learned assembly language, I learned BASIC, and I began to realize that this was something I really enjoyed doing. I was happiest when I was in our computer room at home, just coding by myself, completely alone. You know, after high school, I tried college. I wasn't very focused in those days and didn't have the discipline that I do now. But I was already a hardcore gamer by that point. What that actually meant was, again, spending a whole lot of time by myself playing games. But this was years before the internet, and gaming on computers was largely something that you did by yourself. I look back, it's very clear to me that that's where depression really started in me. It's where it got its root. I'd spend long hours by myself while most of the people I knew were out partying in college. Now, during that time, I'd get into a funk sometimes. I didn't want to talk to people. I didn't want to go out. I stopped hanging out with my D&D buddies. Just wanted to be by myself. Sometimes I'd stay in bed for days, just telling my mom and dad that I was sick or making up some other excuse to not want to be around people. Now, don't get me wrong. I had friends. I did have a social life. I had some really good ones, some that I have to this day. But I was a very solitary person by nature. Now, by this time, I was around 20, and I'd had my first job in the game industry. I answered an ad in the newspaper for a games programmer. And I remember seeing that ad and couldn't believe my eyes. Wait, making computer games? Being a programmer, that was combined the two things that I loved the most. I was all in for it. Now that first job was as a programmer, porting a popular arcade game at the time over to the Apple II Plus. My parents loaned me the money to buy my computer, and I started my first game company, Knight Technologies. The name came right from a TV show, Knight Rider. Yep, really. Don't hassle the Hoff. Now, I remember very distinctly sitting in my apartment by that time, coding for 30 hours straight, completely on my own, only getting out occasionally to say hi to my roommate. I'd sit for hours in the dark, cranking out code. I felt like I was in my element, just me and the machine. I also used my job as a reason not to socialize. There were some days back then that I remember just turning the computer off, not wanting to get out of bed. I'd go through periods where I didn't even want to look at the computer, play games, answer the phone, real phones back then, nothing. Back then, I didn't know what the funk was. Now I know it's called depression. Now I began building my company and started hiring my friends to help make games. And I was able to get some gaming contracts, and my little gaming company turned into a small business that started to grow. That may sound romantic and like an American story, building a business, but anybody that's been a contractor in our industry knows exactly what that really meant. It meant constantly being in fear of not getting more work. It meant the stress of making payroll. It meant working off of milestones and having to hit those milestones in order to literally eat. It meant freaking out if we were late. The pressure was enormous. And there was no more hiding out in my room working by myself because I had people that worked for me. They had to be paid. It was an insane amount of stress, and I handled it really badly sometimes. I worked some inhuman hours in those days. If you're in our industry, you know my story is not unique. This isn't something that I'm proud of. It's just the reality of what I went through. Now, at this point, I've got to stop and kind of let you know how my mind works. Now, even early on, I fell in love with the act of making games. Creating something out of nothing is something that I love. Building something, it's where I get my own personal sense of satisfaction from. I'm very creative by nature. I love nothing more than watching something that I helped to create show up on the screen. Now, those early years changed me a lot. I began to work on games that required more than just me. I found out that I really liked working with teams of people. Now for me, that meant some adjustments. I found my very solitary nature at odds with the need to work with others. That meant by day, I was busting ass coding and making games, but at night, I really needed to be by myself. I just had to be alone. Now, as time went on, I eventually sold that company to a little bigger company, and that company went under, and I ended up at Sony. Now, this was my first time working for a big company. And by that time, I'd been a producer for many years and was leading larger teams. There was a heck of a lot of stress. I helped to start what's now the first party studio down here in San Diego. But with that responsibility came a whole lot of stress and a whole lot of crunch. And this is when my depression really started to rear its ugly head. There were a lot of mornings where it was very hard for me to go into work. And by that time, I was married to my wife, Shelley. She got to see firsthand exactly how much the pressure and the stress began to take their toll on me. I used to play games till very late when I got home. But when the serious crunch started, I found I just didn't have the energy to do that when I got home. I was too tired, and I was actually uninterested in gaming at that point. Something that's unthinkable to me, but it's a part of depression for me. Even on weekends, I didn't want to game. I didn't feel like doing anything, and oftentimes all I really wanted to do was just crawl into bed and stay there. Felt like there's a cloud over me, like everything was crap. Shelley was pregnant at the time, but I was under so much pressure at work, I felt like everything was going wrong. The world kind of felt gray and dark. At work, actually, everything was going relatively well. I was leading a team making baseball games. Now, sports games are their own unique brand of hell because you got to make the season. And the dirty little secret for me is I hate sports games. I hate most sports. So the pressure I felt was immense. And because of that pressure, I would feel every square inch of it and internalize it, both for me and my team. The world felt very dark. I was working till midnight every night. Our team meals would come. We'd get Tony Roma's ribs one night, Roberto's Mexican food the next night, and then the next night pizza, and then sometimes we'd mix the two. I gained like 50 pounds real fast. I felt that pressure. I felt that darkness closing in. That's when I made my first trip to the doctor. That's when I first got my first antidepressant. And I can remember very distinctly the first time I took one of those pills. My heart was pounding. I couldn't sleep. There was a ringing in my ears. Something just didn't feel right. But it also made me feel better. Well, sort of. What it really did was numb me. It made it so I didn't feel the lows. But it also made it so I didn't feel any of the highs. Now, I've never been a manic depressive. I don't have bouts of mania. Many do. That's just not my particular brand of depression. Those antidepressants gave me the ability to keep going and do my job. Now, I'd have good days and I'd have bad days, but mostly things were pretty even, despite the hours. Now, after my days of doing sports games, I was lucky enough to get a boss that let me start making online PC games. Now, by that point, I was already well addicted to online games. This game called Cyber Strike that I would be playing, 4 or 5 hours a night after I got home from work. And back then, you actually had to pay by the hour. So we were getting $600 game bills just after I got married. That was a surprise to my wife. And, she's later discovered that this lifelong habit has never gone away. Now, the best part about that time in my life which was around 1995, was that I got to put together a small team and we worked on an online tank game called Tannerus. And I loved every second of that. It was a small team. I got to be really creative. Now, by that time, the worst of the crunch I'd experienced was well behind me. I was running the studio. We were doing PlayStation games, but I also got to build the little online games on the side that I really love so much. Once I was able to start making original games, it was a major turning point for me in my depression. It's when I started to realize that the antidepressants that I was on really dulled my creativity. And oh my God, I hated that. I would go on and off these medicines because I hated that feeling so much, where it dulled me. Now, many of you that have been on antidepressants may understand what I'm talking about. They aren't very fun. They aren't fun drugs at all. Now, they keep you from feeling bad, but they can also keep you from feeling the best parts of life. Or at least that's what I thought at the time. I found frequently I still wouldn't want to play games even when I was on the medicines. They would improve my mood and let me do my job, but the passion wouldn't be there. And I'd go through the motions, but I didn't feel it in my gut. That's when I was noticing that my ideas were coming faster when I was off the medicine. My creativity was sparked, and I would stupidly assume that just because I was off the antidepressants, that was fueling my creativity. And that started a cycle. I'm sure a lot of you have been through that same cycle where you've been through different antidepressant medicines. Some work, some don't. It sucks dialing that in. And it's painful to go through. I went through that. Now, in 1996, our studio had started to work on the game EverQuest. I was fortunate enough to hire some incredibly creative people, including the legendary and late Brad McQuaid and many other incredible game makers, that many of whom I'm still working with today. It took us 3 years almost to the day to create EverQuest. Now, my job on EQ wasn't the main creative. I was more of a bulldozer. I was getting us what we needed to keep our game going, pushing the game to get built, basically. It was an incredibly exhilarating experience. I distinctly remember the other half of the studio, which was still at Sony at the time, calling us the Ghouls and Goblins guys, and that was totally okay by us. But my old buddy depression was always there in the background. Now, during that time, I began to really start to get control of my depression. I began to get discipline around it. I discovered something really obvious and important that truly changed my life. Sleep matters. Yeah, I know, it's obvious, right? Or it should be. It's also a little counterintuitive. Many people who have depression want to sleep a lot. In fact, that's really all they want to do. What I'm talking about is something very different. It's consistently sleeping. It's going to bed at a specific time every night. It's trying to get 8 hours of sleep, even if you're only end up getting 6. This period is when I got my depression really under serious control. I stuck with the antidepressants, even though I despised how some of them made me feel. I began to really get religion about getting to sleep on time. I built discipline into my life around my depression. I took my medicine at the same time every day. I played the games I loved every day because I started to notice that when I was careful and I took care of my sleep and my basic mental health, I would wake up feeling pretty good in the morning. Then we launched EverQuest in March of '99, and that discipline just went right out the window. For a while, it was a fueled with passion. I can't even begin to describe how exhilarating it is to launch a hit game and seeing all these amazing players love these things that we worked so hard on. It never got old. I loved every second of it and still do. But the hours came back, the stress came back, and my discipline went out the window for a few years. Now, during those years, we built a company after being spun out of Sony, and then we ended up selling it back to them, and that became Sony Online Entertainment. And we grew really fast. That led to a heck of a lot of stress. It was an amazing job, and I was lucky to work with some amazing people. But this is where I also began to notice some of my friends and colleagues had depression. I could see it in their eyes. They'd come in the morning with the same dull look in their eyes that I had. And I could tell it wasn't just from a lack of sleep. Even back then, I started being open about being on antidepressants and how I was feeling. Every now and again, a team member would have a bad day, and I'd pull them into my office and just shoot the shit with them. I would tell them about my depression, and I would see them react with a look of like, wait, you have depression? You're okay talking about it? Guess what? I'm not afraid to talk about it. I really never have been. Some people were super uncomfortable about it. This isn't something that you can evangelize about in any particular way. It's very dependent on the person. Some people just don't want to talk about it, and you have to respect that. But I got an up-close look at the effects that depression had on my coworkers and my teammates. A few years after EverQuest launch, I was running Sony Online. I was taking antidepressants, and I'd figure out by that time that discipline was what I was going to need if I was going to be able to continue functioning at a high level, to lead people and do all this stuff with this like gray cloud hanging over my head. I went through periods where I would stop taking the medicines because they weren't working for me after long periods of time. That's something else that a lot of people don't realize. You don't just take a pill and keep taking it for the rest of your life. After a while, it can wear off, or you can, grow tolerant to it. And so you have to switch to something else. And for many of us with depression, that's a scary time. But even in those periods, I did keep my discipline about sleep. I made a ritual for myself. After I came home from work and hung out with my wife and kids, I'd play games. Then I'd read, and I'd go to sleep. I went to bed early, I got up early. These days, I'm usually at work somewhere between 4:30 and 6:30 in the morning because I don't fight the fact that I'm a morning person. I discovered that mornings work for me. All those late nights of crunching really took their toll on me, but what I discovered is that that wasn't my natural rhythm. The early days of running online games meant a really insane number of hours. I've worked 3-day stretches without sleep launching online games. I'm not alone. Our industry is filled with stories of this. I'm not proud of this. It's not healthy. That kind of pressure is very difficult to handle, whether you've got depression or not. But when you have depression, it can seriously flare up when you're crunching, or whether your game is a success or not. It's not a great combo. And it challenged me to keep up with that discipline. Now, it worked most of the time, but not all the time. Ever since those days, there are times when I have to check myself, stop playing games till 1:30 in the morning. I'd feel the depression just under the surface, just waiting to bite me at the worst possible time. Now, over 32 years of doing this, that depression's always been there, sometimes on the surface, sometimes just below, but the discipline, playing games, reading, sleeping, that's what kept me going and keeps me going to this day. Now, for many of my colleagues and my friends who have depression, I can see them going through the same struggle I have. I've lost teammates to suicide. I've seen the toll depression can take on human lives and families. I've had to give a eulogy for a teammate who took his own life. But I also have seen the good that people do with each other, the help that they give each other. I've seen people going through tough times and bouncing back. I've seen what happens when people share the fact that they have depression and they're going through their own struggles. And I've also seen that it doesn't hurt their careers. Nobody is looking at them differently. They just feel like that because they feel like they're alone. Well, you're not alone. There are a lot of people out there who feel exactly like you do. I'm one of them. What I can say is this is not a war you can win. It's more a series of battles that you fight all the time. You're going to have ups, you're going to have downs. And I found over the years that my depression is very deeply tied to my creativity. I found that a lot of medicines out there just dull my senses. They destroy that creativity. But what I also found is that with a lot of perseverance, I was able to find something that works for me. I found a way to work through the darkness and to find a regimen that just completely keeps my depression under control as long as I follow it. And I don't always follow it. I'm not always perfect. But what I want to share with you is this is a message of hope. Don't be afraid to admit you've got it. Trust me, your friends, they know it. They know you've got depression, even if they don't tell you. You know, I don't always feel like going to parties. I don't love social events. I do love the camaraderie that comes with working with a dev team making something I love. I've learned that sharing that passion for making online games with a team, it's a big part of actually what keeps my depression at bay. Now, I also got a little 4-pound Yorkie named Millie, and she's probably the best natural antidepressant any person could have. She's changed my life a lot. The joy that she brings me every day is a big part of my happiness because I am happy. I've learned that having depression does not mean that you can't be happy. It doesn't mean that you can't be a lifelong game maker. It doesn't mean that you can't love games every bit as much as everybody else. I've learned that having depression doesn't mean that you have a life sentence of a gray cloud hanging over your head. But it does mean that you have to work at it. It does mean you can't ignore it and let it beat you. Don't let it rob you of the joy in your life. Get yourself help. The first step in beating depression is just realizing you have it and being willing to ask for help. Don't be afraid of it. So many of us have this and don't want to admit it or talk about it. Why? I can tell you as a manager who has depression, I can spot it pretty easily in other people. I don't look at my teammates with depression any differently. I just know the signs now. I know when it's time to extend a hand. I'm not pushy about it. I just make myself available and make it known that I'm a safe person to talk to about it. Find yourself somebody to talk to. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness. If you broke your leg, it wouldn't be weird to ask other people to help you. Why should depression be any different than that? I love making games. I hope to do this till I'm 70. I wake up every morning and I know I'm incredibly lucky for having such a long career in our industry. You know, we make games and that's great. It's fun, but it's also a job. We make our living doing this and it's not an easy industry longevity-wise. The statistics aren't great because of the pressure that we all feel to make hit games. But for me as a game maker, depression hasn't made it easier. In fact, it's made it quite a bit harder, but it has made me realize that the passion that I feel for games is something that I still have in me to this day, and I'm not going to let my depression beat that out of me. Now, I don't do all the right stuff. Yes, I get sleep. I'm fat. I don't exercise. I still eat like crap. I know I need to do better, and that's no joke. For a lot of people, the right combination is getting help dialing in their medications, exercising, and sleep. Basically, I'm saying do what I do not on that front. I'm good with most of it, but I still suck at the eating part. Maybe you're like me, maybe you're not. Maybe you got a different kind of depression. Maybe you have anxiety or other stresses that are completely different than mine. But do yourself a favor. Get help. Don't be afraid to admit you need it. Don't worry about it feeling like you're alone and you're the only one on your game team with it. I promise you, you are not alone. And in these times when we're all feeling the effects of working from home and being isolated from each other, lend a hand to your teammates. Be compassionate. Understand that we're all going through our own stuff. This time of COVID is not easy, but none of us are perfect. Even the people that are successful have their demons that they struggle with too. You can get through depression if you just ask for that helping hand. Do it when you're young. Do it when you're older, but do it. Get the help. You can be happy. You won't be happy all the time, but guess what? Nobody really is.